Here we go. So we are recording now. What role do you think Africans, both on the continent and the diaspora, should play in fighting for racial justice in America? And anybody can just kind of chime in and, just let that person speak. If somebody would like to go first.
I have been having some discussions at home on this topic that I think are pertinent. So I'll put a little bit of my thoughts out there. One of the things that I really struggle with is the racism of recent immigrants against African Americans in America. I think that that's something that's very real, that's very palatable, both to African Americans and I think amongst immigrants, as a people that have not been born and raised in this extremely dangerous and punitive system. I have a lot of difficulty, even after all of these years of going through the process of understanding what racism is and understanding or trying to understand what it means to be a Black person in America. And I think, especially because I sound American, because I'm accentless, and I have almost like a seamless integration into the African American community here. I think I'm beginning to understand, but I, constantly upon reflection, I'm always thinking it is absolutely important that as Africans, we recognize this. We recognize that we did not grow up steeped in the racism and the issues that African Americans face every day here. And I think it is very important for us to follow in the leadership of and to listen to and to act in support of our brothers and sisters here, and not to assume that we have answers or should be in the front of the movement. So I'm very eager to kind of hear what other people's experience and perspective on this is as well.
Okay. I'll say I definitely agree. As far like I was born here, like I said, I spent a little time in Nigeria when I was younger, but most of my time has been in the U.S. On a very personal level, I kind of identify very strongly with the African American community. However, I also know my childhood was different. It's like I went home to a different experience, went home to different language, went home to different food, and also my parents were not steeped in the experience of African Americans. So it's like, our approach to American society is not the same. However, I think that we as Africans, both at home and abroad, I totally agree with you that we do have to engage ourselves more in what the African American story is and how we can be of support. A couple of things happened recently, in the wake of the whole George Floyd. I believe, I forgot her name. I believe she played some role in the African Union, I believe. Somebody can probably correct me. I know she has spoken out. There's been Nigerian embassy. I know Ghana spoke up, about what happened with George Floyd. I think all these things are critical. I think they're very important, so that, we can build a stronger sense of Pan-Africanism. Because I think what happens is that, being in this experience is that being on the African American side, a lot of times they feel as though Africa does not care about the diaspora. They feel as though, hey, you know what, you all sold us, you left us, and now we're continue to be abused and nobody's even saying anything. But on the flip side too, Africans came to this country and, and they feel as though African Americans look down on them. Hey, you all stink, you're dirty, you make fun of your names. My name got made fun of, coming up in the country, so it's like, one thing I say a lot that, as much as I believe in the reparations argument, I mean, Randall Robinson on down, I think the most important reparations we need to have is between the Black community, is between people of African descent, to really figure out how do we repair that relationship. In a way, even before you go off and say, let's go off to, somebody else and ask them what reparations you need to give us, So I'll keep it at that. Somebody else wants to chime in.
Chike, this is, by the way, my name is Saikou. I go by Saikou Speaks, originally from West Africa, the Gambia. For those of you who came in late after our initial introductions. These are topics that I'm very, very passionate about, and I've talked about and I've wrote about it in my inaugural book, Testimony of an African Immigrant. I talked about it there in detail. I just a couple of days ago wrote an article about it that I also share with Nwaogbe. That a lot of media platforms are going to publish it this coming Monday. This is a topic that I want to look at from two different angles. The first angle is, I think Africans are not fully educated on the contribution of the African American community to the African struggle. We see ourselves as different from the African American struggle. But like I wrote in the article that is coming up recently, one thing I point out is that when you go back to 1945, during the 5th African Pan-African Congress in the United Kingdom, that was led by Marcus Garvey and W.E.B. Du Bois. This particular gathering was attended by Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, Julius Nyerere of Tanzania, Jomo Kenyatta of Kenya, and among them other African leaders. And one of the key things that was stable at that particular gathering was the independence of Africa. African Americans were on the forefront demanding and fighting for the freedom of Africa, for independence of Africa. To even go further, W.E.B. Du Bois and his wife, Shirley Graham, had to join the Ghanaian fight for independence. And when Ghana attained her independence, they renounced their US citizenship and moved to Ghana to help build and support Africa. So the African American community has always been an ally to the African struggle as a community, even predating independence. But then coming back to the US, I also realized that I came to America with a privilege. I attended 2 HBCUs, Ross College in Holly Springs, Mississippi, and Jackson State University, where I did my master's in Jackson, Mississippi. I lived in down south for over 6 years. I've witnessed the African struggle, the African American struggle at first hand. But like I said, I also understand that I'm very, very privileged when I came into this country. I earned my degrees from HBCUs that were fought for and established by the African American community. Not only that, I now have a very, very nice coveted job in corporate America where I get paid and I paid good and I'm good at what I do. But that's thanks to, I'm also not naive and ignorant about the simple fact that without the affirmative action being fought, some people would never let people like myself in corporate America. Our name alone would even get it passed through the resume process. But thanks to the affirmative action bill that was passed in the 1960s, I'm able to find a job in corporate America today. I also live in a very nice neighborhood, a very nice gated community. Thanks to the free housing, the fair housing community that was been fought for by the African American communities in the state at the same time. I'm a motivational speaker as well. I attended very, very nice conferences. I get to speak and get paid. I sleep in nice hotels. I also dine in some of the finest restaurants in the world. Thanks to the African American community of the Civil Rights Act that they fought for in the 60s. Without it, some of us will never ever have a day. We will never have a chance to be where we are. So yes, today many of us are lucky to attend predominantly white institutions and colleges, but that doesn't come free to us. Every single right, every person of color in this country enjoys is being labored through hard-fought protests, where African Americans march when they face the barrel of the gun in their face and still marching. African Americans march when they have been sprayed with hose pipes and water tanks. They march when they have been lynched and hanging on trees. They march when they have been chased by police dogs and shot at. And they are still marching. So if I'm sitting here today, it's thanks to their struggle. And I'll be damned if I do not join the Black Lives Matter movement, even if I've never been affected by racism. My people have been affected, and because of them, I am. And this is why I believe every African, especially in the diaspora, should make it their responsibility and even a duty to make sure they stand by our African American brothers and sisters in the diaspora.
All right. Thank you. Nana, I believe, sorry, Nana had raised her hand. Malik, you can go after her, if you don't mind.
Of course, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. And, you know, just reflecting, this is what Baji does. So Baji is the largest Black-led immigrant rights, racial justice organization in the country. And so we advocate, we organize, we educate on behalf of the 10 million or so Black immigrants and refugees that live in this country. But then we also work with African Americans to fight for racial, social, and economic justice. Opal Tometi, who was the executive director of Baji at the time, is one of the big three of Black Lives Matter that actually, you know, got the sort of the hashtag and other pieces of it going in terms of the communications, but also, you know, Baji before Opal, we started officially in 2006, but we're a little before then. It was started by African Americans and folks from the continent and the Caribbean. And this was the purpose, in order to make those connections and to see how we could unite the diaspora. We have Unite the Diaspora events that we do nationally. We are headquartered in Brooklyn, used to be headquartered in Oakland, but we also have offices in Miami, Atlanta, Los Angeles, Oakland. We have an office or staff in Minneapolis, and we have staff in Houston. And so this is sort of our bread and butter in terms of the work that we do. And I would say that there's, you know, I'm going to add a little bit of nuance and kind of build up on what our brother Saikou was talking about, but in terms of where we are, where it seems that we are, you know, being someone that literally does this kind of work every day and has been doing it before I started with Baji. So I think firstly we need to I think that the lack of understanding about the history of multi-generational African Americans and the legacy of resistance and the legacy of struggle is a big piece of the work. And it's a work that everyone has to do. So, you know, I don't describe what happens within Black people as racism, because my definition of racism, I guess maybe is more classic in terms of dealing with issues of power and, you know, other pieces that we don't have. So I wouldn't describe it as that. I put it more in the category, I think about it when we think about the great migrations that were made, and how, you know, people will have moved up from the South into the North, and then anyone else that came after that was Obama, you know what I mean? And they were like confused, and that people would treat them like they were terrible to this day. And so I want to first start by saying that, you know, as Black people, one thing I have noticed, whether you look at the continent or whether you look here or in the Caribbean, we have this thing about making distinctions between ourselves. I'm not saying that it's good, but we do that. The villages, you know what I mean? The northerners, the whatever, the easterners, you know, and it can rise to the level of tensions that actually cause death, even in this country. It's like Biggie and Pac are dead, you know? It's not difficult for people to get territorial and to start to feel like their experiences are so different from other people and to treat each other poorly as a result. So I want to sort of lay that out there as I make these comments. So I think we need, there's also, we can see that when people become more clear about our history, collective history, whether it be the history of Black people, African Americans in this country, the history of the contributions of Caribbean folks and Africans, continental Africans to this country as a part of the struggle of this country, including where African Americans engaged in struggle felt they could flee to, right? The fact that they would flee to Tanzania and flee to Angola in terms of the Panthers is not by accident. It's not just because they were like, oh, we're Negroes, they're Negroes, we'll go there. It's because there actually was work that people were doing cross movement within the Pan-African movement, and that much of the conversations that folks were having over here and over there are because of that fertilization between folks like Du Bois and Padmore and Nkrumah. You know, this is not vacuumless. People are not just sitting on their pieces and not, you know, sitting in their land and not communicating with others. So I think it's important to also talk about that. And then bring that up into this time period where we have people that are clear or have at least some information and shared experience with respect to anti-Blackness. We are there. You know, I think this idea that Africans are sitting at home while these people are protesting, I want to push back against that. That's not what's happening. I mean, the classic, what's happening in Minneapolis is 3 blocks away from, you know, the major area where Somalians, Kenyans, and others live. And they're there in the streets. The African aunties are making food and bringing it out to the protesters, are doing childcare for people. The classic picture of the sister with the hijab kicking the tear gas canister. And I don't know if you all have seen that. You can't tell if that's Minneapolis or Mogadishu. So, you know, what's happening in Atlanta, and, you know, in all of the cities I know that at least Baji is in, and others in Kansas, in North Dakota, and places we don't talk about, where African immigrants are working in meat and poultry plants and are engaging in strikes right along with African Americans over their health conditions, engaging in strikes at Amazon. Again, these are things that are public enough that you can Google them and find them, about where we are fighting side by side, where we are politically conscious, right? And where we are not, we see both in the world of African Americans and in the world of continental Africans, that people have a level of what I'll describe as anti-Blackness that is there. I mean, the expression "niggas and flies I do despise" was not made by Africans from the continent, right? Niggas ain't shit is not for Africans from the continent, right? So there is a level of anti-Blackness that we all have and that we all have to deal with, that is rooted in the way that this country defines and has treated African Americans. That requires us to center that struggle for all the reasons that our brother Saikou pointed out and laid out. But that's a Black people wide issue, right? That we need to talk about in that way. And certainly as folks from the continent, it's important that we're clearer, that it's not just because we highfalutin and so this and that we're able to get into these spaces, and that we're clearer as to the debt that we owe African Americans. But I think that the way or the manner we need to do that is one that unites us, as opposed to causes us to be divided, even in trying to recognize what's happening here in terms of anti-Blackness in this country.
Absolutely. Listen, I think this is about time that this kind of meeting takes place. You know, where you see not only those African immigrants, but also a part of our brother and sister from here. This little confusion that takes place. By the way, that young lady that was, you know, making those comments, I was there. And trying to bring water to
Cameroonian, right?
Yeah, from Gabon. I'm from Gabon.
No, the lady.
Yes. And I think that voices, distracted voices, have to be met with also an alternative of you know, view of, you know, because a lot of us are doing a good job at trying to bring the community together. But when you see somebody like that completely distracting the effort that we put on the ground, we have to respond to it. We have to really make sure that people understand that we don't share that kind of view. Because our experience, the African immigrant or even the African on the continent versus the African American experience, we've been introduced to each other by cliches. You start with the Hollywood portraying the African American male as a gangster, drug dealer, violent, and all kind of stuff. On our side, you see those imagery coming up to the Western Hemisphere. everywhere. You know, you see those kids with flyers on the nose, the Tarzan movies and kind of stuff. So the best way to destroy somebody is to tell them, you know, hate your mother. And that's exactly what this society have done. They successfully did a good job to actually make sure that they continue to do us to better rule us. And I can tell you, you can if you're not careful enough, most of us, you know, usually fall into that trap, especially when you meet some of the ignorance. You know, you come to America, somebody make fun of your name, and you automatically you just jump into that stereotypical understanding of what our relationship is. But you have to keep in mind, we have 50 states here in the United States. All African American are not the same. They don't believe the same thing. If my wife is African American, she's from the South, but she tells me stories where other kids make fun of her because she's from the South. So we have to be a little bit more sophisticated to understand that we African as well, among us, we also have those kind of, you know, in Gabon, you will see somebody coming from West Africa, living in Gabon. We call them foreigner. And this is an African man on his own land. We call him, and I believe some other African here can agree with that. We call each other foreigner, and we still on our own land. And also the fact that there is no true understanding of our own history. I have to learn more about Africa when I went to Howard University than when I was on the continent. Colonized by the French, the first thing you have to know is the French history. They don't teach you who you are. You know, even if they try to, it's not gonna be exactly in the way you can have that mindset that you unify you and other Africans. Sometimes we're even surprised to see African Colombia, like one of the largest population in the Western Hemisphere. You know, Black people in Brazil, Black people in the United States, in the Caribbean, all of these Black people or African are there for a reason. But when you came from your country, do you really understand why they're there? And what is that bridge, that effort to create that bridge so that we always are connected? And I shout out to the brother that, from Haiti. Haiti, that is a special country in the Caribbean where people have a tradition of trying to keep in touch with African. And as a matter of fact, that would be something good if they become a member of the African Union. But the return on our, you know, trying to also attract them, you don't see that a lot. How much do we do to attract our brothers and sisters back to the continent? Ghana will be at the forefront of that effort. Most countries don't do it. It's like, okay, what happened in history happened, and then we have forgotten about it. We have to step up. We have to work even more. I know there's some people participating in protests and all kind of stuff, but we also have to be a part of this political and social discourse. We have to do a part of the conversation to say, listen, we're here too. This is our land too. And these people are our brothers and sisters. It has to be clear. It has to be a strong voice. And on this panel here, smart people, we can represent that voice. It have to start now. And when we have this kind of conversation, let's include our brothers and sisters, because the diaspora is not just us coming from back home, it's also them, people in the Caribbean. That's what the diaspora. And it seems though that it's only African American that understand that without Africa, and when I say African American, this is just you know, part of the elite, the regular African guy. You don't expect somebody who were born in jail, grew up without no parents, and say something that hurts your feeling, and you take that as like the universal view of African American. That's wrong. That's wrong. That lady from Cameroon that made that comment, she ignorant, but we have to voice, we have to step out and say, listen, this is not the time, and you have to be quiet or step back. If you want to protest, go in your house, make a video, but don't come to try to contradict or attack people who are trying to solve a situation, because you're here because people like Martin Luther King have to die for you to be here. They have losing in the blood, tears, and so much. Somebody already give a so many examples of how much, and as that was Brother Saikou, that actually tell us so much that this community of African American have done historically, and still when you see the compassion toward us, Mandela have to go get out from prison because people like Jesse Jackson and others putting pressure of the United States government so that the United States government can put pressure on the South African government but we have to do a little bit more. And I made, just to give my last point, I made a very tough video on my page, but that was in French because I'm come from the Francophone part. I didn't see a lot of action from the Francophone African. So I have to speak to them in French. I say, you know what? There was some event taking place in France. And I don't know if you are familiar with Charlie Hebdo. There was that press house was attacked by terrorists. African leaders went to France and marched. Everybody was Charlie Hebdo on their pages, just to show how they were in a brotherhood with the French people. And I was emotional. Like, I couldn't comprehend that you are doing something. I understand that individually. I protest Obi. You go to on the Obi page, she always there. But that's nothing. We have to make sure that the countries, our individual country, do something. We can speak to collectively, or we can speak to the embassy to make sure that they understand we are watching them, and they have to do something. African American will never be a strong community if Africa is not united. Yeah. We have to be united, and we have to speak one voice. We have the African Union. If you cannot do something like voice your opinion because you're maybe a small country like mine, then guess what? Call your brother and sister within the United African Union. Even write a letter, especially when you have somebody in the highest office who call you shit old countries. This is an opportunity for you to say, listen, you have now shown us that you have history of not supporting us. But guess what? We might be poor, but these Western countries function, the capitalism function with resources that we have to deal with it. So if you're not friendly with us, if you don't respect our people, then we are gonna have to redefine our relationship. It takes nothing. And when you together speaking like that, I think we can move forward in terms of how we impose on other people the way they treat us. Because if we don't do so, then the person to treat us the way they've been treated us. This is about time. We have to stand up, continue to push this forward. After even when this crisis is over, we have to continue this conversation and build bridges between our community and the African American community. Because at the end of the day, we are one people, and without each other, we won't succeed. We won't succeed. So that's what I was trying to contribute to this, because you don't understand why people in England will go in front of the parliament, ask for the president of the United States to resign. You see people in France marching, you all of this European nation. And when you turn to Africa, it's just, small groups from Nigeria and that are trying to do something. Where are we? So we're gonna have to start telling the truth, even if it's uncomfortable. Let's just say that we are not doing enough to show the world that this is about our humanity. This is an African humanity. I don't care where you African American, Brazilian American, everywhere where the African people are, we have to be concerned about how they've been treated in public, even privately. So if we don't do that, then we already send a message that it's okay to disrespect us. It's okay to mistreat us.
Thank you very much for that. It's very important and passionate conversations going on here. I know there's some other people who need to speak, but I wanted to see if we can get a perspective from an African American. Salim is, you know, African American, but he's living in Kenya right now. And then we also have Melissa on the line. Melissa, you still there? Melissa?
I'm still here, yes, I'm still
Okay,
here.
yeah, we can't see you, so I don't know. But yeah, I mean, I know the folks need to speak as well, but I know, you know, right now it's, you know, a lot of folks, you know, with recent heritage to Africa, you know, speaking about African American community. I just wanted to see if we can get a perspective from, you know, an African American, you know, and how they're perceiving some of this.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to share some thoughts. I think one thing, in terms of my personal story, I'm married, I'm in Kenya. My ex-wife is Somali Kenyan. Mm-hmm. Her family's from Wajir County in Kenya. So when the borders were created in Kenya and Somali, they ended up in the part of Somaliland that was in Kenya. And for those, I'm sure, you know, folks here know, it's a pretty tight-knit, Somali community in general. It's a very tight-knit community, both around religion and culture. So it was interesting experience for me now to come in as an African American and kind of be confronted with some of their perceptions of, oh, our daughter's, you know, marrying a Black guy from the States, right? And so that's like a lot of the work they had to do to, you know, to work through a lot of their assumptions around who I was before they had ever met me. And a lot of that has happened. And one thing that comes to mind in thinking again of my personal experience, and I've been coming to Kenya since 2008, that's when we first came, but living here consistently, as I said, for about 6.5 years. Is that I think I've traveled a good amount, but having spent a bit of time and kind of, you know, having had some space from the U.S. and you know, looking at the U.S. from afar now, I don't think that I was as aware of the kind of constant pressure of you know, of racism and racial structure in the U.S. As I was, you know, having stepped outside, I was really able to kind of look at things from kind of a bird-eye view, you know. I mean, I'd always envisioned living on the continent at some point, so it's something I did want in my life. And that really has helped me out a lot and given a lot of perspective. And I've had, you know, not this specific conversation, but I've talked to, you know, you can imagine, I'm talking to a lot of brothers and sisters from the States right now about, okay, what do I need to do to get out of here? Like, that's the conversation that's coming up a lot. And like, well, you know, it doesn't have to be that common. I know if it was a minister of culture in Ghana, Nana would know, who like today or yesterday was like, come home. Like, you know, I mean, the invitation's already been open, but they're like giving an encouraging, you know, endorsement to come repatriate in Ghana. So, you know, one thing that struck me about Brother Malik was saying is this, you know, this building bridges. Again, coming back to my experience, you know, that happens at the deepest level. I mean, we can get information. You know, I'm coming from a perspective of education. I've been a teacher for, you know, over 20 years, different art forms. And so the spaces where people can have personal experiences, in my experience, are the most transformative for people. We can understanding the history is critical, you know, but a book only takes you so far. You can understand something, you know, conceptually, intellectually, but it's when, in my experience, it's when you have a personal experience with someone that, you know, a kind of shift can happen. As I was saying with like my mother and father-in-law, it's when they met me and we got to know each other that kind of their perception, particularly my mother-in-law, that her perception started to shift and change about, you know, who an African-American might be. And so for me, my personal interest is always in creating spaces where that can happen. This is kind of a, you know, a centerpiece of my work. I work in a slum community here in Nairobi, working with, called Kibera, working with youth there who are already community organizers. You know, most of them haven't had real experiences with a Black person from the States, and certainly not in kind of a mentorship position. So these kind of experiences, and this seems very connected to the work that, is it Brother Jube, am I saying that right? From the Urban Sankofa Project is doing, is creating real experiences. So for me, you know, the way I see it, the extent to which we can kind of bring education into a conversation, into a space in which people understand both history and kind of the current climate, as well as real experiences. And this is, again, even the work, Sister Nana was on one of our sanghas a couple weeks ago. And to me, this is kind of the platform we have now. This is still a real experience. So, when we think about creating spaces where people can have these real experiences that shift, that might shift a mindset around, who we are as people, what the continent is, just understanding the vastness of the continent itself, particularly for Black people from the States. I'm always surprised, like when I meet people around my age who, and it still strikes me sometimes that people haven't prioritized coming to Africa from the States, people who have means, I'm talking about in particular. It's like we go to all these places, and this is one of my criticisms. We've talked about, Capoeira Angola, multiple people here are connected to that art form. It's one of my criticisms of a lot of the senior teachers in that art form, that it's constantly in the rhetoric, in the conversation, but no one invests in actually coming here and spending some of their money. People are in Europe, they're in Asia, they're in the US, but no one's really coming to Africa. But people like to talk about it all the time. And I'm like, well, there's a gap, there that needs to be filled. So for me, like, I think a priority is personalizing this Pan-African experience so that people can be in spaces together, understand who people, and this to me connects to kind of what everyone said about what our perceptions. I grew up saying this nonsense of Jamaican African booty scratcher, what. That was, I was there. I was like, that's how you would clown someone, so I didn't know. I was equally susceptible to it. Fortunately, I was in a home environment in which that was getting kind of counterbalanced and checked very quickly. And so, I was kind of educated, out of that thinking to a certain extent at home, but it was still there. So again, for me, I think a priority is thinking about creating spaces where there are interpersonal connections. That's where I've seen, the most transformation happen with people. And I really, again, appreciate the work, this Urban Sankofa project. It's in alignment with a lot of work I'm doing. I think everyone here is, connected with similar kind of work, whether it's, political work, law work, it's an amazing group of folks here. So yeah, this to me is like what really can kind of shift, and then also from those kind of spaces, starting to put together whatever the particular agenda is, whatever the focus is, and actually making movement happen around projects, around, agenda items, but from that connected interpersonal space, to me, is really the foundation.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you. Lucia, I know you're out there in Angola, been waiting patiently. I think we got Jube back too. I don't know if one of y'all wanted to chime in.
I mean, I could go real quick.
Sure.
So, thank you, Brother Salim. And it's Jube, like Jube candies, jubilation.
That's my fault. I think I said Jube earlier, so that's my
No,
fault.
I mean, it looks like Jube, But
we see you in the wild, so, but thank you for calling in.
Of course, it's all good. It's better than, to be honest, what white people say. They when they see my name, they usually say Jube, and I'm like, that takes out all the flavor, man. It's like, come on. But anyways, with the work that we do at USP, all of these, this whole discussion is really resonating with me because our mantra is changing the narrative, reconnecting the diaspora. And what I found, and it was kind of disheartening, is that when we set out to go on our first birthright trip last year, I was reaching out to young adults. Our age range is 18 to 30. So that's the requirement to go on a sponsored birthright trip with us. You have to be Black, obviously, 18 to 30, and have never been to Africa. But what I found is that we had to do so much work in talking to people about what Africa truly is, right? So I've been to 3 countries. I've been to Zambia, South Africa, and now Ghana. And that's not even a lot of travel, I don't think, but it's enough travel for me to, and even before I went to Africa, honestly, I always kind of pushed back against the false narrative that I grew up with. I was like, nah, it can't just be all this and all that. So when I went there, I'm like, oh, this is beautiful. Like, why aren't we here? And my first trip, I was in Zambia. It was at a missionary base. And you can imagine, I'm here as an African-American with a predominantly white missionary group. And, you know, there's thoughts about that in hindsight. But nonetheless, I was there. And here I am on this missionary base with predominantly white people. And I'm like, yo, I mean, I'm here to help my people. Why aren't more of my people helping our people? You know, why aren't we here? And it just struck me, and that's why the mantra is there to change the narrative. Like that's the first step we have to do. I had to convince so many young people on why it's important for them to go to Africa. Mind you, it's a free trip. But I'm like, after a while, I was just like, come on, if I have to convince you, then what's the point? But, you know, it's really reflective of just the mindset that we have here in the West. And Chike, your story really resonated with me because, you know, I'm first generation Haitian American, right? So both my parents were born and raised in Haiti, and I was born here. So I had this weird upbringing where at first I wasn't accepted by the African American community, although I lived that experience outside of the home. I was called Haitian booty scratcher. When people heard my name, they were like, what? Jube? So growing up, I told people my name is JB. To this day, there's so many of my childhood friends that know me as JB because I was too ashamed to even try to correct people, because once they hear that name, they know it's an indication that I'm different. They don't know what I am. They think it's African. If it's Haitian, it's even worse. So it's like, yeah, I'm just JB. Just call me JB. So outside of the home, it was Haitian booty scratcher. Inside of the home, it was don't talk to those Black Americans. They're lazy, right? So here I am stuck in the middle between two opposing communities, each having stereotypes of the other, but the origin of those stereotypes were not of our own, right? These are narratives that were pushed on us that we then have to proactively push against. But if you're not proactively pushing against them, you are just undeniably going to be susceptible to them. So that's the work, and for me, that's the hardest work, right? Is to change our people's mindset, not just of Africa, but of each other, right? And I was so blessed, Saikou, by what you were saying, acknowledging that the opportunities that you have now, these blessings that you have, are because of the work that African Americans have put forth for generations, right? And that was a conversation that I had, you know, it was like 2 years ago with a Ghanaian brother. He was here, we worked security together, and he was talking about, yeah, you know, African Americans, I think they're kind of lazy, I think that, and I was like, look, brother, you got to understand, without the work of African Americans, you wouldn't even be able to stand here at this counter, right? You wouldn't be able to stand here at this counter with other people who don't look like you, much less being able to migrate from Africa to work here. So that acknowledgement, that knowledge is something that it's very important. So that's why with us changing the narrative, it's a two-way street. We have to change the narrative that Black Americans or Black people in the West have of Africa, but we also have to change the narrative of what many of our African brothers and sisters have of African Americans.
Thank you. That's so true. Thank you, Lucia. I see Melissa raise her hand, but I told Lucia she's gonna go next, so we can go Lucia, then Melissa, and then also before Lucia goes, I just wanted to check in with time, because there was like a couple of questions. I see like we're like already over an hour. I don't know how folks' time are, but it is something that you know, plan to kind of do again and kind of, you know, keep the conversation going. So, you know, if after Melissa and Lucia go, you know, we can just kind of check in with time again. If folks need to go, then we can cut this and, you know, just try to keep it going, you know, another time. So, but Lucia, you can go ahead. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Chike. Well, this is a very interesting conversation, and I've been thinking and thinking. And I must confess that I haven't taken any considerable amount of time to think about these things. I was born and raised in Angola. I went to the US when I was 19 years old. And I went to Morris Brown College, a historically Black school. And that's when I realized I was Black and African. The first time I had an experience, you know, racism experience, it was in Portugal when I was 12 years old. Growing up in Angola, it was just, okay, I'm from Malange. That's where my family is from. I was growing up in Luanda, in the capital. And then when I went to Portugal for a year, I went to school there for a year. That's when I realized I was actually African. So depending on how I evolve as a person, I realize more and more that I need to consider issues like this, right? So my husband is from the Caribbean, the US Virgin Islands. Now I see that, you know, it's important for me to understand this phenomena so that I can explain to my son. There is a need for me to understand better because I've been mostly reactive to these kinds of things. I'm in Angola right now, and you know, the reaction of people here, young people, well-educated people or not, is very similar. George Floyd, they don't really understand why, you know, the essence of Black Lives Matter. I'm not sure why, but I think it's because we already have like a set of problems that occupy our minds. And when we think of Black Lives Matter, it's like an extra. So Black people in Angola, they're not as concerned as Black people in America as far as Black Lives Matter goes. And so I'm concerned about that because when I speak to them, like if I talk to 10 people, only one person will share the same perspective. Like we have to pay attention to these issues for the facts, you know, the obvious reasons. But there's not a lot of conversations in Angola going on about George Floyd. It's something that is very distant from us. Not for me, because, you know, I've been in America for about 20 years and my husband is from there and my son, etc. But, you know, these are some of the thoughts that just went through my mind. And, you know, as a Pan-African, I think we need to, it's pertinent that we discuss these issues because many of us are still very ignorant. There is a lot of division still, you know, and what divides us are, you know, the social problems that each nation has to face in their own countries. So we need to open the conversation about unity, you know, and, you know, as a global Africa, because it's almost non-existent from my experience, from what I see. You know, it's different when I go to America. I can talk about race with the brothers and sisters from, you know, the African diaspora, from Africa, whatever. But when I'm in Angola particularly, it's different. They don't believe in racism. This is very, it's serious when someone who is Black says that there is no racism. There is a lot of, we see a lot of people still operating in the colonized mentality. So it's really, really hard for them to see, like they're blinded by this mindset. So it's really, really hard for them to see what's really going on, what's real. So I'm just here in Angola, very concerned about how we're going to unite. Maybe, through these conversations, some solutions will emerge for us to open a conversation, a global conversation, a global African conversation, so we can start addressing, real issues, and start, bringing some light to the minds of Africans, So I'm still thinking, I was watching everybody, I was listening, everybody sharing their experiences. I'm processing, of course, because I'm in between two different realities all the time, most of the times. And so it takes a little bit of time before I form strong ideas about certain issues, because I'm here and I'm there, I'm there, I'm here. So I'm still processing. I just want to commend you, Chike, for starting this conversation. It's very pertinent. I wish more people from the continent were part of this, but I'll be happy to share. Since you are recording, I'll be happy to share the conversation with people here in Angola, people in Africa, so that, I can pick their brain, on this issue. So this is it. That's all I have to say. In terms of time, Chike, I don't have that much time because of my little one. He's not feeling too well today. So so I just wanted to say this. Thank you for the time.
Thank you very much, Lucia. No problem about the time, and anybody else too. If your time is tight, you can peacefully bow out. But we'll try to get the last two speakers in, and then this is the first time we're doing it. I think what we'll probably do is that as it moves forward, just kind of have the one question. Since like 10 people, we're going to try to cap it at 10 all the time, so everyone gets a chance to speak and express themselves and things like that. So I totally understand with time, but let's try to get the last two ones in. And if you can stay on, that'll be great. If you can't, thank you so much. I'll be putting this up on YouTube and starting a Facebook page for it as well. Be called African Like We. All right. Melissa, you want to go ahead?
Yes. Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate the conversation topic. I think that the role that Pan-Africanism plays within this current conversation continues to be the most important next step. But unfortunately, I think we've been at this next step since the last riots in the 60s, the last collective riots in the 60s, I would say. Excuse the baby in the background. The conversation has always been global. The solidarity amongst our people continues to be consistent, but we're still at this next step of Pan-Africanism and how it's going to affect change. Because we see the violence against Black bodies in the United States, but we also see that in every other metropolitan area and every other country of the world. And it's all based on this idea and reality of white supremacy. And when you look at how Pan-Africanism is going to play the role, the next role has to be this global requirement of self-sustaining societies. So we're here and we're asking for police to do nothing else but stop killing us. And they can't even come to concept of what does that mean? Well, tell us, what do you want us to do? How do we change it? How you change your policies that are gonna affect you is on you. Because my concern is my people. And if we're in a self-sustaining society and we're policing ourselves and we're educating ourselves and we're creating systems for ourselves, for us to be self-sustaining, what you do to us will drastically change because I'm depending on myself. And I just think that we're at this next step, and the global conversation is occurring because you see the protests in London and Amsterdam and all over the world, but you see it in places where there's this constant interaction with white supremacy. And if you're in a place like Angola and you're not constantly in the face of a white policeman and you're not constantly being policed, then the conversation is going to look different. I have to convince the children in North Philly that racism exists. They know the feeling, they know the interaction, they know how it makes them feel, but they don't have the words of what it's called. And as I teach and as we guide our youth towards understanding the dynamics and giving them the vocabulary to talk about it, doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, and it doesn't mean that that's the particular fight that we should be that we're at. So I just think it's a continued conversation that's imperative that we continue to have, and you know, we be ready for the next step.
Obi, thank you, Melissa. Sorry about that.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. I've been enjoying everyone's conversation, everyone's input. I don't think I want to keep everybody here any much longer, but I just wanted to talk about my own personal experience. I mean, if you are an immigrant in America, you've most likely heard phrases like, you have an accent, where are you from? And it comes across as almost like having an accent is a bad thing when it really shouldn't be. And then for us Africans, we look at it like, well, I mean, I'm speaking English, why can't you understand what I'm saying, right? And for me, I'm first generation Nigerian American, and I did grow up between DC and Nigeria, but when I came back to the States, of course I came back with an accent. And when I got to Howard University, my final year in college, my journalism teacher told me that I had a speech impediment. And she went as far, and this is Howard, this is a historically Black college, right? She went as far as sending me to the school's speech therapist for an evaluation. And when I got there, the speech therapist had me read a few things out loud. And he said, who sent you here? Nothing is wrong with your speech, you know? So I go back to my teacher with the note, and she said, well, it has to be your accent. And if you want to make it in journalism, you cannot make it in journalism if you have an accent. I will suggest that you actually want to be a producer instead. You can't make it in front of the camera. And graduating, that was my final year in college, you know, and like Africans do. What are you doing in journalism, right? So I am, you know, I was disappointed. I was really, I didn't know what else to do, and that really discouraged me a lot, and actually resulted in me not applying for any jobs in the media. 3 years after I graduated college, I did not have the courage to apply, only because a teacher that's African American, that's Black like me, told me that I wasn't going to be able to make it. So to add to everybody's point, I know that we have implicit biases amongst ourselves, amongst, you know, Africans. I know how many times I've argued with people online when it comes to this whole Black Lives Matter. When I say people, I'm talking about my African brothers and sisters who now forget that the fact that you occupy space here in America, this is your fight too, right? So this is not the time where you can say, oh, I can easily go back to my country. No, if you can easily go back to your country, you would have gone by now. So if you're gonna be here, and if you have kids here, your kids are not going back to Africa to go live. Let's be honest. You yourself, you're not going back to Africa to go live. So you have to make the place that you call home, you have to make it safe for you and the people after you, right? So, and speaking of racism, when I sent the George Floyd video to my cousin in Nigeria, he said to me, oh my God, that's horrible. I thought racism was dead. Are you kidding me? I had to like sit and dissect that whole, because I've never talked to any of them about racism, because I'm like, I know they won't understand it, but I have to start talking to them about that now. I have to let them know that, yeah, whenever you ask me to send you money, it's not easy for me to get a job out there. You don't even know, like, you have to understand the barriers that I have to face as a Black woman in America to get a job. And then if I have a foreign name, if they can't pronounce my name, they put that resume to the side, right? So we within ourselves need to, because some of us coming from countries where within our own countries, for instance, for Nigeria, we have tribalism issues where somebody from one tribe doesn't get along with the person from the other tribe just because of what? I still don't understand. So they now bring that tribalism issue and transfer it to the way they see African Americans. Like the other day, I made, on my Instagram page, I made a comment, and an African American came to me and said, in the comment, they said, so tell me, what does akata mean, right? And akata is a phrase in Nigeria that we use for really means cotton picker. And I have refrained from using that language. I don't use that, but how do I get my other African brothers and sisters not to use that language? And I sat back, I'm looking at this comment, I'm like, do I really respond to this? Like, I really don't want to get into this topic, but I had to say something, right? I had to tell them, okay, yeah, this is what this means, and we should no longer keep using that language. And these are the kind of conversations we can no longer shy away from, that we need to have. And, you know, from the people, you know, Chike and Mr. Saikou and Mr. Malik that know me on here, they know that I'm about action. And I really want this conversation, if we take this off of this Zoom meeting, it needs to be boots on the ground, what we're doing. We need to start, for the longest time, the story of the Black man in America, the story of the immigrant in America has been told by everybody else for far too long. We need to start changing that narrative, like Brother Jube, yes, like Brother Jube said. So we need to start changing that narrative, and I'm happy to be part of this. I'm happy to, you know, whatever we have to do to really make that happen. And I'm just glad to be in everybody's company today. This has really made my Sunday.
Like I said, this was the very first attempt at doing this. Like I said, there were a few more questions, but given that it took us over an hour to get everybody's perspective in, you know, I think that we'll cap this, you know, and Obi is going to be another one of the coordinators of this right here, you know, but the format is, you know, to really make it as Pan-African as possible. We're going to try to make sure that, you know, we're representing from the continent, African Americans, Caribbean, you know, just really want to make it Pan-African as possible. As I was saying before some people joined in, you know, we all know people from our own personal communities, but if we're not having a global conversation, then I think we really kind of, you know, limit our potential and our power, you know. So if anybody else wants to end on any note, you're welcome to end right now. Otherwise, I want to thank everybody for joining in and for contributing. I see some people are saying some stuff in the chat. It's very positive, and we look forward to inviting people back and continuing this conversation. If anybody has any last words they want to throw in, or any projects you're doing, you're more than welcome to share right now.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. Oh. So sorry, I just wanted to mention that we did collect everybody's social media. I know Chike saved that file, and we're gonna share with everybody on here so we can, you know, continue this conversation offline. And I know Mr. Saikou also mentioned August 28th being the March on Washington. I'm from DC. I can easily go home, but if you need to book your hotel, you want to do that now. It's important that we keep showing up as much as possible.
Definitely. And I think there's a 2 million, I don't know if I'm supposed to say that online. Well, I'm just saying this is going to be public, but I think there's some folks, I just got invited to a private group, you know, about another march, which I'll share more offline. So, Jube.
Yeah, I was just one of the thoughts that I had coming into the meeting was I feel like now is really the time for those of us who are on the continent to really fortify Africa, right? And what I mean by that is I can foresee, and the movement is already growing, where so many of us are seeking to leave the States and move to the continent for whatever reasons, political, asylum, whatever it is. And I think echoing what some of us have already said, I feel like those on the continent, part of what made our trip so special is that everyone we met on the ground in Ghana was so welcoming and so encouraging of us being there. They were so happy to see us. They were so happy to see African Americans traveling and coming home, right? And I think if more countries took that initiative upon themselves, not just Ghana, but I'm talking Nigeria, especially those on the West Coast, the Gambia, Senegal, and I'm seeing Senegal has some programs coming up, but even places like Liberia, all these places that have historical ties to the African American community, if more effort was made to welcome, right, the diaspora. But in order to welcome the diaspora, it's like, well, what are you welcoming them to? So that's why I feel like it's so important for us to continue that work of fortifying Africa, to continue to develop Africa, so that those of us who want to come home can come home. And on a personal note, next year, sometime in 2021, Chike, I told you this already, but just opening up to everybody else, I'll be going to Nigeria to set up future trips. So I'm looking for connects. It'll be my first time there. So I'd love if those who have connects in Nigeria, or even more connects in Ghana, we can link up offline and chat. And this has been great, so thank you.
Can I say one thing to that point that you made, Jube? I totally agree with you. Africa needs to, be fortified, as you said. And I think this is part of the reason this conversation, or try to put the call out for this conversation, is kind of like, because on the African side, some of it is like, what are you bringing? And it's not necessarily, saying that, oh, we can't welcome you and things like that. I think both communities need to be fortified so that, it's a fruitful exchange, so to speak, because it's like, I totally understand the emotional connection, but growing up here and hearing both sides of the story, I had to start taking some of the emotion out of it and just being like, okay, there has to be something that is, like, because people migrate. Your parents migrated, my parents migrated, but it's, in a way, they were also, coming to here, coming to the U.S., they went to school, they contribute to society, things like that. So I think that we have to have a place for both, right? We have to have a place for doing both, having the emotional connection and welcoming us back, but also, hey, we're also here to build as well, and that's part of the critique I have of the African diaspora, the recent African diaspora, so to speak, out here, is that, we have so many engineers, doctors, accountants, all that type of stuff, but it's like when we talk about going back to Africa to actually build, people are very apprehensive, kind of like what Salim was saying. There's like this apprehension of going back to Africa and build, yet you're in America and you're building and you're taking all the racism that comes with it, but you don't want to go back, to our own continent, our own home, and build. And I'm saying myself included. I'm right here in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, having this conversation. So I'm not saying that I'm any holier than thou. I'm just saying, as we see the movement is growing, and I think that's part of it, is holding ourselves more accountable. So I think somebody else had, Salim,
yeah.
go.
I just wanted to share like an update on this question, this point in Kenya right now. There is a group of, like a WhatsApp group of Black expats living in Kenya. And there's some representatives from this group, it's called Still We Rise, who are in conversation with local government right now on easing immigration policy for diaspora Black people. So definitely taking note, of course, from a country like Ghana. And so, we're working towards that end to kind of open things up. Kenya is a bit different from Ghana. There's a lot more, it's different. levels of red tape. Immigration department here in Kenya can tend to be a bit corrupt. And so these are the kind of things that, you know, and just things that shouldn't hold up the process for anyone. You know, and they're not, and it's not necessarily coming, local government, I'm saying, from the same standpoint of always like welcoming, you know, diaspora Black people in. You know, it's kind of like, well, where's the money? You know, is going to be the question in Kenya, unfortunately. So, but that conversation's happening, just so you all know, and you know, we're actively a part of really trying to encourage a different kind of immigration. I think government's been open and receptive to it.
Thank you, everyone. I have to go. I apologize. I have to leave. But yeah, I got to go train some legal observers for an action that we have tomorrow. And so I'm going to go and do that. But this has been a really great conversation. Thank you all so very much. I think that as we're thinking about marches and other things, that we should put our ears to the ground. I happen to be, as Salim knows, a hardliner on a lot of things when it comes to Black folks. I am a revolutionary and come from that perspective. But I think the people that are moving the things forward in terms of the demands in the streets, that it's important for us to put our ear to the ground to what they're talking about as next steps, to be able to connect with that, because Al Sharpton's march may not be it. Just to put that out there, you know, that may not be it based upon the politics and the connection in terms of people that are right up front. So just want to encourage us to center the people that are really on the front lines right now. Thank you so very much. Appreciate you all.
No problem.
Thank you, Chike.
If we can, on that note, I know people have more to say, but on that note, let's close this, and we'll be keeping everybody updated about you know, social media and things like that, where you can find this video, and then also about, you know, next steps for us here in this type of conversation and solutions as well. So thank you all. Really appreciate you. Yeah, I don't know what else to say. Obi, you want to last words?
No, I just want to say thank you, and be on the lookout. You're going to hear from Chike and I about when the next meeting, the next steps, and we'll try to connect everybody through social media. So we'll be seeing you guys soon.
All right, thank you.
All right, appreciate everybody.
Bye-bye.
Have a great rest of the day. All right, peace.
All right, peace.
All right.